Hello, everybody. Welcome back. My name is Sophia, and I operate Sand Me Down Designs here in Missouri City, Texas. So, for our project on this video, we have this 6-drawer Thomasville dresser that is a really solid piece. It is in good condition. This was a thrift store find locally for about $70. I picked this out of my inventory because I needed something to work on relatively quickly since I was going on vacation. The only thing that's really wrong with this is that piece of trim on that drawer there is missing, so I will have to recreate that. And just FYI, if you want to skip ahead, I will be painting this piece. In addition to the trim work that needs to be done, the drawers are in good condition. They are clean, but they are a little beat up. So I will be doing some repairs on the drawers as well. First things first, as always, you take off the hardware, right? This hardware did give me some trouble. Those plates were adhered not only with teeny tiny escutcheon pins, which you could easily get off, but they also had this screw/nail mechanism, which made it really hard to get under there and not risk breaking or damaging not only the plate, but also those lock plates that you can see me working on there. So with a variety of different tools, my 5-in-1 tool, pliers, whatever I could get my hands on, I worked really hard to get all of these plates off and not break them because I knew I wanted to reuse the hardware. Once all of the hardware was removed, I got to cleaning the piece. It was relatively clean from the beginning, but I used a diluted solution of simple green to clean the piece. I spray it on, let it sit for a little bit, wipe it back, and then I make sure I also wipe the surface again with clean water to deactivate and rinse off the simple green, or else you get this white haze. After I had thoroughly cleaned the piece, I knew I wanted to do a stained top with painted bottom. I got to stripping the top. I used the clean strip, very fumey paint stripper. It's all I had on hand, and it did a good job. I applied it with a chip brush. I believe I let it sit for about 15 minutes, and you can see there, just using my 5-in-1 tool, it came off relatively easy. After having removed the strip of residue, I noticed there was still some finish left behind. So I decided to use my carbide scraper and scrape off as much of the remaining finish as I could. I wanted to get the top as close to raw wood as possible before I even started sanding because it was a veneered top, albeit a thick veneer, and I didn't want to risk damaging it. Here's what the top looked like after the stripping and scraping procedures were done. You can see there is some interesting wood grain there. I definitely wanted to showcase that, but it already looks a little orange. It does have a few scratches, which I'm hoping will sand out at this point. They're almost so fine you can't even see them, but they are there, and I want to get the top as close to perfect as I possibly can. So I started the sanding procedure with my Surf Prep 3x4 electric ray. Since I was already dealing with a stripped surface, I started with 120 grit, proceeded to 180, and then went up to 220 to get as smooth a finish as I could. As I was working through the grits, I did see that the scratches were sanding out, so those were no longer a problem. For the edges, I used my little curved profile tool and wrapped some sandpaper around and just got into those grooves as much as I possibly could. Here you can see me starting the process of filling in that missing trim piece. Now I could go ahead and just try to fill it with Bondo with repeated attempts, but it always works better if you can put a little filler piece in there, glue it in, and then Bondo with the filler piece in place. So I had this piece of trim and the profile on it happened to work almost exactly perfect. So I took some time, took some measurements to cut out as small of a block as I possibly could using my pull saw and secured it in place. So after I had my little block cut out and had secured it with glue, I mixed up the Bondo wood filler that I have. Now, I've been using this same can for over a year now. I did end up buying the wood filler at first. The regular Bondo, from what I've heard, seems to work better. But this is really simple. You basically put out as much of the putty as you need. You mix in a little bit of the cream hardener, mix it together to where it's one consistent color throughout, and it starts to react. So it puts out some heat. It's an exothermic reaction, and it starts to harden almost immediately. So you have to work in small batches, apply as much as you need, try to be as smooth and consistent with it as you can possibly get it, because you have about 3 minutes to work with it. After that, it starts to get kind of goopy and it won't end up congealing and hardening. Once that's hardened, then you can sand it smooth. Right off the bat, it doesn't look like it's solid, but you can sand as much as you need and it won't crumble, crack, or start to disintegrate. There were some gouges on the top lip of this drawer. I ended up filling those with Bondo as well. I let the Bondo dry fully for about 30 minutes and then used my sander to sand back as much of the excess Bondo as I could. I was just trying to get the face of the drawer as smooth to the remaining trim as possible. And then I knew I had to recreate that intricate inner lip portion of the trim. This was actually the most time-consuming process of this entire flip. You can see here I'm using a variety of different tools. I started with my chisel to kind of take off as much as I could. I ended up using my X-Acto knife, sandpaper, I believe some of the profiling tools. But after all that work, I do believe I got it very smooth to the surrounding area and blended it as best I could. My next step was to get the drawers and the body of the dresser ready for primer. I sanded the outside and inside of the drawers. I scuff sanded the face of the drawers with 150 grit And I even hand sanded some of the trim detail to make sure that the primer would stick. For the body of the dresser, I use that same 150 grit to scuff sand to make sure that I'm giving enough tooth to the surface to allow the primer to adhere. Next, I turned my attention to the top. I knew that I wanted to give it a lighter stain color, so I used Lily Moon's Smoky Gel stains in the color Wooden Barrel. These are water-based stains. They're super easy to apply. You just have to work quickly. First thing you want to do is wet your surface, wet your applicator sponge, and then you apply the gel stain either to the surface or directly to the sponge. I actually like to apply it directly to the surface. Then you take your applicator sponge, spread out the gel stain over the area that you have wet. So make sure you're not getting it on the dry part because it's going to dry too quick. Once you have spread the gel stain evenly, then almost immediately you want to wipe it off. It's going to look like you didn't do anything, but you're going to see as it dries, it's going to dry a little bit lighter than it is initially, and you're going to see some of the color start to develop. Here is what the top looked like after the gel stain had fully dried. Next, it was finally time to apply my first coat of primer. I am using the Bin Advanced Shellac Primer for this. It runs very easily through my Super Finish Home Max sprayer. I really wanted to get a nice even coat of primer down. That way it would help me see any sort of imperfections that I needed to fill in. For the filling in process, I use Bondo's glazing putty. Very easy application. You do want to let it dry because it has a tendency to crack. I'm in a humid environment, so I think I'm more prone to this. But I used a soft Bondo spreader and really try to get into all of the little cracks or divots that were just built up in the wood over the years. Fill those in, allow the glazing putty to dry, and then I'm going to go back and sand everything smooth. Then I can go ahead and apply a second coat of primer to really seal everything in. While the primer was drying, it was a good opportunity for me to clean up the hardware. I did have these soaking in a vinegar water solution overnight, and I knew they were solid brass, so I definitely wanted to keep them. I really feel like they finished off the look of the dresser. They cleaned up really nicely just using some 2/0 steel wool and elbow grease. It is finally time to paint. I am using my Erlex 5700. The paint color I chose is Sherwin-Williams in the color Rock Garden. I always strain my paint before I spray just to make sure I don't get any sort of little bits or coagulants in there. In my area, sage greens are really popular right now, so I chose a darker sage green, almost a military green for this dresser. I really thought that it would modernize the outdated look of the piece. The way I get a very smooth satin buttery finish from my paint jobs is that I always, after every coat, I go through with a very, very fine, basically a worn down sponge pad. I go through all the surfaces not to knock back any of the paint necessarily, but to make sure that I don't have any dust nibs, gnats, mosquitoes ending up in my final coat and ruining it. So I do a light scuff sand, essentially, making sure I go through all of the surfaces, knocking back anything that gives a rough texture. So again, I do this between every coat of paint except for the final coat. I do the same thing after every layer of top coat, again, minus the final coat, which gives you the final sheen. Now, Sherwin-Williams trim enamel actually doesn't need a top coat. It dries very, very hard. But I always do at least 2 layers of top coat just for that added protection. Since I painted the dresser with the drawers in, I did have to go back and touch up the edges of the drawers, which was really no big deal. Next step was I wanted to line the drawers. I didn't want to do anything super loud or fancy, which is kind of my go-to. So I found this grass cloth peel and stick wallpaper with some tones of green in it that I thought would complement the look of the dresser nicely. At first, I was only going to line the top 2 drawers, but I had enough of the peel and stick wallpaper to go through all 6 drawers and freshen them up. My favorite way to cut out liner is to do a crude measurement of the width of the drawer, cut that, and then roll up the paper, butt it up against the front of the drawer, and then cut off any excess from the roll on the back end. That way I don't end up with a lot of paper that ends up sticking to itself or really not behaving the way I want it to. After I have paper in place, I just use my X-Acto knife to go through and cut off any excess. It's not foolproof. I'm not the best at lining drawers, but at least have this method down. My next step was to apply some finishing wax to the outside of the drawers. I don't apply it to the inside because I feel like it might leave a residue on people's clothes when they do use a piece of furniture. But on the outside, it just kind of brings that wood grain to life. After that was done, I rubbed the drawer rails and the guides, so on the underside, with that same finishing wax just to make sure that they are gliding nice and smoothly. So let's take a look back at what we started with. This was a solid piece. There was not a lot of work to be done. Again, I was getting ready to go on vacation and I needed something clutch and fast. So it was solid, great bones, had that missing trim piece and the outdated orange. And this is what it looks like now. That green really makes it pop. I love the lighter tone of the top. Took out a lot of those reds that were naturally in that wood. The brass hardware complements the piece nicely. So overall, this piece took me 2 days. Those 2 days were not full working days on the piece. I still had my full-time jobs to contend with. So I would say all in, I put maybe 10 hours into this piece, which is not too shabby, but let me know what you guys think. Would you have chosen a different color? Do you like this color? Should I have gone with different hardware? I'm always open to suggestions and I do read each and every one of your comments. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe if you haven't already. Please comment. I really appreciate the interaction. Till next time.